I think because The Last of Us is one of those shows that shows you different ways of preparedness and survival within an apocalyptic world, right? And one of the things I read when we were looking into you is that you sort of champion this idea focused on community, emotional resilience, shared infrastructure, and, kind of like Jackson, so to speak, right? We're going to keep the analogy.
But preparedness doesn't have to be a solely right-wing phenomenon. It can be owned, and I think that it can be owned by anybody, and it should be owned by everybody.
That you're not hiding in your bunker, hoarding cans of beans, and just unhappy as hell eating cold beans out of a can, right? With a wooden spoon. Like, that's not how you're advocating that life needs to be.
Creating a warm and engaging mechanism for your podcast, consider Green Tony as a suggestion that combines an upbeat and inviting spirit without any background music. Welcome to Tangelic Talks, your go-to podcast from Tangelic, where we dive into the vibrant world of clean energy, development, sustainability, and climate change in Africa. We bring you inspiring stories, insightful discussions, and groundbreaking innovations from the continent making waves in the global community. Tune in and join the conversation toward a brighter, greener future. Let's get started.
Welcome to Tangelic Talks, a podcast at the intersection of energy, equity, and empowerment with your co-hosts Victoria Cornelio and myself, Jensen Cummings. In today's episode, we're talking climate collapse and personal preparedness with Eric Shonkwiler. Eric is the writer and creator of When If, a newsletter on preparedness and collapse from a leftist perspective. He and his work on preparedness have appeared in several publications, including The Guardian, CNN, and Live Like the World is Dying. He has also published 3 books of fiction, including 2014's Above All Men, a novel about the economic and climatic collapse of the United States. Eric, thanks for being with us.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
All right, get the last name right?
You did.
All right. Got my job done. Okay, I wanted to read this specifically as doing some research and getting into the website, which is very well organized and detailed, which I really liked. You say in their quote, When If is explicitly leftist, anti-capitalist, anti-racist, pro-LGBTQIA+, abolitionist content. If that's not your speed, this probably isn't for you. I was taken by that. I was drawn to that as well. I was very, very interested. It got me thinking right away. Why did you feel the need in kind of positioning yourself in a space with the preparedness that it needed to be said that it's coming from a leftist perspective? Was there not that space being occupied currently? Did you feel like there was a gap there? What kind of drew you to that specific positioning in this space?
There certainly is a gap, particularly when you are talking about the common parlance of a prepper or preparedness. The idea that people have when you hear prepper is this person with a wall of guns and like some freeze-dried buckets of food in their basement. This is encapsulated pretty perfectly by Bill in The Last of Us. So you've got that idea. Bill in the beginning of that Last of Us episode is the idea that comes to everybody's mind.
Yep.
But preparedness doesn't have to be a solely right-wing phenomenon. It can be owned, and I think that it can be owned by anybody, and it should be owned by everybody. I, in particular, am a leftist, and there is a pretty severe lack of content anywhere anywhere past the right. So even you've got some decent content with like an apolitical stance, which I find to be somewhat cowardly, because so much of what we're preparing for these days is political. All of it really is political
By its nature, yeah.
Yeah. But in particular, you have a few other people in this sphere that are talking either directly about preparedness, like Margaret Killjoy in Live Like the World is Dying, her podcast, or podcasts like It Could Happen Here by Robert Evans, which dance around the subject of preparedness, but are coming at the subjects that you need to prepare for. But shy of that, there's not a ton. There are a few, there's a blog here and there, and there are certainly groups that are working toward preparedness from certain angles. My idea was to fill a niche that was lacking for folks that needed. When I began the project, it was from the ground up. So you basically have nothing. Here's where you begin when you have nothing. I've been working on WinIF now for almost 5 years, and at this point, I've talked all about making sure that you've got beans in your pantry. I've talked about that as much as I can, and so now I speak more on.
Being enthusiast, I read. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. My wife and I, she's vegan. I'm very nearly vegan. So our protein comes, a lot of it, in my case, from beans, lentils. I love them. But yeah, there is certainly a lack, and I saw myself, at least in the beginning, fulfilling that niche in particular, and building on that over the course of these years toward talking about, like you said in the beginning, climate collapse and kind of collapse in general.
Okay. That's really interesting. So I was telling Jensen before we hopped on, I'm going to try my best not to mention The Last of Us because this is a serious conversation. But I think it's really important.
Eric jumped right into it.
Right into it.
I could see the smile on Victoria's face.
Well, I think because The Last of Us is one of those shows that shows you different ways of preparedness and survival within an apocalyptic world, right? And one of the things I read when we were looking into you is that you sort of champion this idea focused on community, emotional resilience, shared infrastructure, and, kind of like Jackson, so to speak, right? If we're going to keep the analogy. So, how did you first encounter this emerging community, and what kind of surprised you most about how they redefine preparedness, and does that influence how you define preparedness?
To jump to the second part of the question, I think that the surprising thing about leftists and preparedness is that there's sort of nothing surprising about it. This isn't a It's not for people that aren't coming at this from a right-wing perspective where they think that they have to hoard, and they're thinking very individualistically and with a capitalist mindset. The big thing that we all try to talk about is community. It's mutual aid, helping each other out, having shared infrastructure, and it's instinctive. It's not surprising. It falls back upon, I think, what we all like to think of as human nature, which is that the reason that we're all here talking to each other is because of shared infrastructure, and because we all had these ideas that we decided to share with other people from time immemorial to the present. And without the notion that we would share these things, we wouldn't be where we are today. If we wouldn't have the internet, we wouldn't have roads. So it's not surprising. It is this fundamental tenet of humanity that we're in this together. This is one planet, and it's smaller than we think. And if we're going to make it, we have to do so together.
I was interested, understand the kind of the perspective and the gap that you're filling. From you, from a personal standpoint, I read that the spark maybe for you was all the way back to childhood, your grandmother, right, going through the Great Depression, and you said jokingly and seriously that she could stretch a can of soup, you know,
Yeah.
as far as the eye can see, so to speak. How does that kind of taking you back to that perspective and seeing her perspective in that way as an adult now, as somebody who now is creating this type of content, how does that influence and how does that give you perspective on kind of your own mission, your own goals, your own path forward?
So it goes back to what I was saying in this sort of the instinctive nature of us working together. It reinforces that. When I think about how my grandma made it through, my hometown, I grew up and was told essentially that we didn't leave the Great Depression until about 1960. It just lasted for us. And my grandma living through the World War II, and she was in America, so she wasn't like living through battles or anything. But you were stretching money as far as you could if you had money. My family, we were on stamps, and the way that they survived uh, is the way that I think um, anarchists like myself and other leftists and communists to some extent see us surviving, which is that we make an agreement between ourselves that we take care of each other. So my grandma would watch children and in turn get some food from a garden, or get some clothing repaired, or get a new tire put on a bike. Um, it's an exchange of goods and services rather than just putting money into the machine and having that money go somewhere else. It was always a reciprocal relationship. It was obviously, when I say you do X and you get Y, that's transactional, but it was based on this idea that we are together. We're a community. I do this for you because I need it, and I know that you'll do something for me because I'm going to need it eventually. And that, I think, that makes it this, like I said, this instinctive notion of community. That it just reinforces that. I think that I come from that place, becoming a prepper and becoming a leftist and eventually an anarchist almost simultaneously, meant that I I came into truths that I always knew, and rediscovered them or came at them from a different angle, and just knew in my heart that this was always sort of probably how things should be.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is there was an inherent thing there, and as you've lived through experiences, you kind of uncovered the layers of that and got in touch with the reality of that you already knew, but probably didn't have the way to articulate it. And I can imagine there's a big, maybe disappointment in the way institutions are at the moment, especially how ready they are to support the kind of relational, community-based resilience that you're talking about. So, what are some things that you think need to change that would be not necessarily immediate, but would help us fast forward the kind of prepping that you're talking about?
That's a huge question.
I know.
What should get changed in this system? Oh man. Um, so when it come, I won't speak for the system, because if the system were functioning as it should, as I believe that it should, it probably would be vestigial. It would hardly exist. But first steps for a person, are to the metaphor that I use and that people use frequently begins individualistically, and the metaphor is secure your own oxygen mask first. So and that is just to make it through a crisis. So take that metaphor as make sure that you have the resources that can get you through something acute. Uh, if you're me and you're about to experience a pretty heavy heat dome following a storm. But I wouldn't be surprised if we lost power. I know that I've got neighbors, a few neighborhoods over that still don't have power from a pretty middling storm the day before. You combine those two things, and depending on your health, you're in danger. Um, and it's as simple as that. Not terrifically unique events combined to create a crisis. And if you are prepared for that, you are then on a stable position to help others. And that is the basis, really, for When If and its beginnings, and the basis for my stance on preparedness, which is you make sure that you're okay so that you can help other people. If you're prepared, you're not a liability. So make sure that you are okay, as a first step, with the intention behind that you go out into your community to assist others. It's a very quick jump, from being prepared for a crisis, or a disaster or what have you, to
Yeah.
mutual aid, to lending whatever skills you have, to the people around you.
Yeah, and I think it's a good distinction that you make there because most people think about preparedness and, the put your mask on first as like, I'm going to put my mask on and I'm going to stay here and that's it. Right? So, I guess that's kind of well, how do you what's the word I'm looking for? How do you reconcile a lack of trust in institutions with this focus on collective action and community reliance? How do you organize then in this community?
Well, it's sort of funny being as far left as I am. You wind up with some of those conventional sensibilities that preppers have, which is a distrust in the system, a distrust in the government, because you don't have to look very far. I could literally almost look out my window and see failures in that system, failures to take care of people, and to take care of the infrastructure that is supposed to be supported by, to be materialistic about it, our tax dollars. So there is a, a distrust, that I don't think needs to be reconciled. I don't have to uh, hold these two notions together in my mind like with a juggling act or anything. I have a distrust in the system. I do not have a distrust in people. So my community is not the system. My community is not the government. My community is certainly not the state. The people that I am wanting to go out and assist in the wake of some disaster are my neighbors, and friends, and as far as my resources and skills can reach. But at no point does that mean that like I'm trying to help the cops or trying to help FEMA. Um, we may inadvertently be doing similar work at some point, but that does not mean that I'm trying to assist them. Nor do I necessarily think that they're really trying to assist us.
I want to understand this a little bit. We joked about The Last of Us and talking about these different archetypes, right? These characters of what we assume a leftist versus a right wing in any given sphere, let alone the prepping sphere specifically. I imagine that the left and right is not linear, right? There's many things that are circular in this, where sometimes we have more in common potentially with somebody on the right wing than we do somebody else who might say that they're a progressive, that they're a liberal, that they're leftist, that they're a Democrat, if we want to go political. So what do you see as far as some overlap within kind of your counterparts on the other side, so to speak? And then where do you see, okay, here's distinctly, now I understand from a nuanced standpoint, this is where we distinctly are divided, and here's maybe where we really do have a lot more intersectionality than I may have thought, or others on the outside may think.
So I'll begin with the folks that people call to mind. That they call to mind Bill. In the beginning of that episode, at least, he's on the right. He's probably a libertarian. I think he even has a Gadsden flag. He's just distrustful of the government, but the end that he is working toward is simply survival. Um, and I'm working toward more than that. And I think that while I share that distrust of the government, with Bill and with people on the right, um, that distrust, it's borne out for the same reasons. We see things that we expect from the system that aren't being given. And in certain cases, we align on those. In some cases, those people on the right that distrust the system distrust it because of social gains, as simple as gay marriage and faltering recognition of trans rights, that as we speak, is being evaporated. I obviously would disagree vehemently with those people. I see those small social gains as being victories that we should cling to. Um, but their distrust of the system overall is something that we share, and something that we can agree on, and a place where I think relationships can be built. Whereas that is our on the left, like probably our primary sticking point with people in the center, or people that would describe themselves as liberal or progressive. They tend to believe in the state and think that the state is doing good things, and I simply disagree. There are things that it has done correctly in the past. I think that those victories are far outweighed by the exploitation of the global South, as we exist in a capitalist system. The way that we live in the United States right now is largely because we have extracted the wealth of other nations, primarily in the global South. And that goes unrecognized largely, I think, by centrists and progressive and liberals. They don't really recognize that where they are fighting for these social gains that I will reiterate are very important. They're fighting for those gains on the backs of people that they don't think about. And that is that's a sticking point that I'll never get over. Those people I would insist come to terms with their relationship with the state and with extractive capitalism. Whereas I would tell people on the right, probably the people that you think are demons are actually just human beings, and you need to get over yourself.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that follows the logic of if we are part of a community, you know the people that came before you, and in a community you share stories and you share lessons, and everything's a lot more interconnected than just the one thing that's happening right now, completely disconnected from the next thing, right? I kind of want to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the things I read in your website specifically was how preparation isn't just about stockpiling, it's not just about community, but also addressing grief, fear, and acceptance of, the collapse that is happening.
Mhm.
How does that happen? How do you go about that? What methods or practices have you seen effectively support people through this?
That I think is probably, I'll be frank and say like my weakest subject. I can largely only speak to my experiences and the experiences of my friends. Literature. It's fun. I gazed around and immediately I'm confronted by books. So I would suggest before anything else that people look to descriptions of utopia. As few and far between as those are against dystopic pop culture, The Last of Us obviously is a dystopia. Um, that perspective tends to outweigh those that find a utopia in the future, but they do exist and they can be helpful. Um, Parable of the Sower would be a big one. Octavia Butler, Ursula K. Le Guin comes up with not necessarily utopias, but differing perspectives that permit a person to dream of a world that exists. I think that you could find a one-to-one correlation from Ursula K. Le Guin's The Dispossessed, where these people anarchists exist on a moon in a dispossessed state. They have very little in material goods or even so much as food. And they orbit around this capitalist planet that has so much. But I think that you can find a way to look at collapse through that lens. Um, a lot of what is going to disappear around us is something that you don't necessarily need. A lot of the systems that exist are exploitive and extractive, and without them, we think that a lot of what we have will disappear, but in reality, I think that we would get along just fine. It's just that we won't have all of the things that we think we need immediately. So the thing that comes to mind immediately for me, for whatever reason, is strawberries. You would have strawberries when they're in season, uh, but you wouldn't have them year round because you're not going to get them shipped from across the globe where they're growing because it's springtime in the southern hemisphere or what have you. Um, that is the fact that you don't have strawberries when you want them is not collapse. Uh, while the system that brought you that may have collapsed, uh, you you can still exist and you can still have strawberries sometimes. I think that there is one of the things that we have to do when we think about collapse, whether that be climate collapse or the collapse of the systems just from the economic overextension, from wars or what have you, is that life can continue. You have to shift the way that you look at it. So you take that perspective from the dispossessed and you find ways to survive and enjoy life uh, just without the accoutrement that you had previously. Netflix ceases to be probably, um, but maybe you still on occasion get together with friends and watch a movie. You know, I think that those things become more joyous and greater reasons to celebrate. Because of that, I don't even want to say like privation, but that temporary lack.
The fact that you talk about strawberries is just like really hit me. We just had the strawberry moon here, right? And there was some debate. It's like, oh yeah, because it's like red like a strawberry. It's like, no, it's not actually red. It's because it's signifying the strawberry season. is what it was. And it got me thinking about the seasonality of strawberries. And then 2 weeks ago, we got these hydroponic strawberries, and I'm thinking, like, I don't even know what a strawberry is anymore, because I grew up in Germany, where we had Fläse, this best tiny little wild strawberries, and I started thinking about that. I was like, well, I don't even know what a strawberry tastes like anymore. I was recognizing in myself in this moment. So that got very meta for me
Yeah.
for a second there, and I appreciate that. The joy for life. I want to touch on that. I want to give you the opportunity to talk about that. You're not hiding from the world, is what I keep hearing from you, and everything that I've read. That you're not hiding in your bunker, hoarding cans of beans, and just unhappy as hell eating cold beans out of a can, right? With a wooden spoon. Like, that's not how you're advocating that life needs to be. Talk about the joys that you're finding and that you kind of instill in these communities, and the way that you're going about bringing that type of mentality and approach to what seems like a very daunting lifestyle.
Well, I think that that shrugging off the aspect of that right wing prepper who has to stay hidden or to be on the offensive is the first step in finding this lifestyle, my lifestyle as a prepper, to be one that doesn't need to be one of fear or an impending scarcity or anything like that. By centering community, you you begin that method of preparedness in a way without even realizing it. So we have chickens in our backyard, and one of the greatest things about my day is the first thing that I do in the morning, which is I get up, I go outside, and I let the chickens out, and that to me is just so cool. I go out and I do this very little farm chore, and we don't eat the birds, but we do eat the eggs. So I let them out. I feed them. I give them table scraps sometimes. They really got lucky yesterday. We had some English muffins that were a little bit stale, and I was like, well, they're going to the birds. So I took them out with an apple and fed that to them, and they went crazy. Uh, and they give us eggs, and to interact with an animal in that way, to get to eat something from their work and be rewarded by your work, and in turn, um, is just so cool. And I like another part of that cycle is that I don't buy soil. Like, I don't go to Lowe's and pick up a bag of fertilizer. Uh, I use the chickens. I compost it, and then I get to put that in my garden. Um, but to bring that around, the produce that I grow, mostly corn and tomatoes and beans, and the eggs that the birds lay, at least in the spring and summertime, it's too much for us. So that goes to neighbors and friends and community members. Um, and that is just joyful to me. I have never accepted a dime for any of it, and I never will. Neighbors are like, please let me pay something. Eggs are so expensive. And I'm like, no, I wasn't going to eat these. I have more than I need. I don't need anything for that exchange. Just, take them, eat them, enjoy them. I think that that idea uh, of fostering community is is so so contrary to that idea of the guy hiding in his bunker, um, that it's paradigm shattering. Um, so much so that I almost take pause at the question. I'm like, well, I don't really have to worry about that at all, do I? Um, because from start to finish, my day is out in the world. I'm trying to help people, even if it's as minor as just giving my neighbor some eggs. Whereas the stereotypical prepper is in his basement, like, I don't know, pulling up an Excel spreadsheet for all of his supplies maybe, and making sure that he's rotating them, which is a thing that I do too. But like, I don't know what else he's doing with his time. Maybe he's just fiddling around with his guns.
Yeah, and I think it does tie back to what you were saying. It's not just about survival, but putting on the mask so you can go out and help people. Because what's the point of surviving if you're just going to isolate, right?
Yeah, I don't see I don't see a reason for continuing to exist as to go back to The Last of Us, as Bill without Frank. If all that you're going to do is live through to be like the last person on the planet, I guess if you want those bragging rights, okay, but I don't understand it.
I gotta say, I like how pop culture this episode got, because it just makes it more relatable. And that was important to me in having this conversation and just digging into your work a little bit and understanding it. Uh, this whole show and everything that we do is about Victoria and I constantly having existential crisis and having meta moments where we can like reflect on our own impacts and things. So it's selfishly, I appreciate kind of learning about these things and having a little bit of zest for life while still, not going through life blindly at the same time. It's really kind of what I see from a fundamental level, that I may not live the lifestyle that you live, but it doesn't mean I have to be obtuse to the fact that this is a reality that is going to be more beneficial in many ways and more sustainable than the life that I'm even living. So I can appreciate that. And I like that we're giving our audience an opportunity to create a little bit of resonance with the work that you're doing and recognize it. So I appreciate that. And also, acknowledging that that preppers on any part of the spectrum are needing to be acknowledged as well, because they are doing work in sustainability that a lot of us are not willing or able to do. So I can appreciate that. All right, that's all the time we have for the video cast part of this. As always, everybody, that we get some of that exclusive content for the blog post. We'll do a little bit more Q&A with Eric here, so go to tangeliclife.org and check that out. I think we're going to get some specific details. I selfishly want a couple specific details that I can try and apply in my own life, and hopefully those things can help you out as well. But once again, we've been talking climate collapse and personal preparedness with Eric Shonkwiler with What If. Eric, we really appreciate you being on.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk power, let's talk change. From rural lights to brighter days. Equity rising, voices strong. We're building tomorrow where we all belong. Tangelic Talks, energy, equity, pride. Empowering the world, side by side. A spark becomes a fire, a vision that's true. Together we rise, it starts with you.